prayers, the Honorable Minister of Commerce.
Let us pray. Almighty God, from whom all wisdom and power are derived, we beseech thee so to direct and prosper the deliberations of the Legislative Assembly now assembled, that all things may be ordered upon the best and surest foundations for the glory of thy name and for the safety, honor, and welfare of the people of these islands. Bless our Sovereign Lady, Queen Elizabeth II, Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, Charles, Prince of Wales, and all the royal family. Give grace to all who exercise authority in our Commonwealth, that peace and happiness, truth and justice, religion and piety may be established amongst us. Especially we pray for the Governor of our islands, the Premier, the Speaker of the Legislative Assembly, the Leader of the Opposition, Ministers of the Cabinet, ex officio members, members of the Legislative Assembly, the Chief Justice, and members of the Judiciary, that we may be enabled faithfully to perform the responsible duties of our high office. All this we ask for thy great name's sake. Let us say the Lord's Prayer together. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. The Lord bless us and keep us. The Lord make his face shine upon us, and be gracious unto us. The Lord lift up the light of his countenance upon us, and give us peace, now and always. Amen.
Please be seated. Proceedings in this Honorable Legislative Assembly is now resumed.
Administration of oaths or affirmations.
None.
Reading by the Honourable Speaker of messages and announcements.
None.
Presentation of petitions.
None.
Presentation of papers and of reports.
None.
Questions to the Honourable Ministers and members of the Cabinet.
Honorable members, revealing the Honorable Premier to take his seat.
The elected member for Newlands to ask the Honourable Minister of Employment, Border Control, Community Affairs, International Trade, Investment, Aviation and Maritime Affairs. Question number 10.
The member for Newlands, question number 10.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise to ask question number 10 to the Honourable Minister for Employment. Can the Honourable Minister state how many cases of unfair or constructive dismissal are currently being investigated by the Department of Labour and Pensions?
The Honourable, the Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as at 30th of September this year, there were 40 investigations active with the Department of Labor and Pensions concerning unfair dismissal. These cases are at various stages of the investigative process and may include cases that have been mediated and are pending resolution, as well as matters pending referral to the Labor Tribunals. Separate and apart from those 40 active cases, the investigative process was completed for 7 other cases which are now being referred to the Labor Tribunal for resolution. The DLP does not have authority under the labor law to investigate matters of constructive dismissal.
The Honourable Deputy Leader of the Opposition, the member for Newlands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As a follow-up, I wonder if the Honourable Member could state whether or not there has been a noticeable increase in complaints for unfair dismissal since say March of this year, when we started to be impacted by COVID.
Mr. Speaker,
Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I have with me the Director, and I would ask your indulgence so that I can confer with him before.
Certainly. He's on his way to you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, actually, no. I am advised there was quite an active first quarter, but once we went into the lockdown, the number of complaints fell off substantially. So far this year, we've had 49 complaints compared to 108 in the previous year at this point.
The member for Georgetown Central.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the Honourable Minister say, can a business dismiss a person based solely on COVID-19 related matters? And if so, how?
The Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I'm not sure what the member means by COVID-19 related matters. There could be any range of things. If he could be a bit more specific, we might be able to respond.
The member for Georgetown Central.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Minister for asking for clarity. Actually, I'm looking for clarity myself in respect to I've had complaints to me as a representative that employers are using the term COVID-related as a reason for dismissal. Now, I've tried my best to research all the labor laws in respect to whether they have the authority to do that. And I'm asking, am I unaware of any ability within the law that is connected to any special circumstances that an employer can do this? And if not, the public needs to be aware that employers cannot let them go solely on COVID-related matters. That's what I'm trying to accomplish in my question.
Honorable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I'm still no clear on what COVID-related matters are, but what I can say with confidence is that there have been no amendments to the labor law which would change the basis on which persons may be terminated.
The Honorable the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm struggling to find a way to frame this, but I mean, just on the same sort of vein that the member from Georgetown Central was speaking of, because what I've noticed, I've had a lot of complaints myself, but there's a lot of misrepresentation of what the actual law is. And I don't know that the DLP can fix that, but has there been any efforts or enhanced efforts at educating employers, dealing with talking to employers, advising them what the law says and what they cannot do? Because I think a lot of people have been sort of duped into a situation where they just don't complain because they feel there's nothing they can do.
Honorable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I'm advised by the Director that they have been working to make sure that everyone, employer and employee, are aware of the terms of the labor law generally, but in particular with respect to the basis on which a person can be terminated. They've issued press releases. All of the relevant information from the law is up on the website. They have had the DLP continue to operate right through the lockdown, and they have had their phones open and available to discuss with employees and employers any of these issues, and they've had many such discussions. I myself, Mr. Speaker, have had a number of people speak to me about these issues, and I've done my very best to advise them as well. But the actual number of formal complaints has fallen off significantly, as I've just indicated. So if people do have a reason to complain, they should lodge the formal complaint so they can be properly investigated.
Member for Georgetown Central, last supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the minister say if the department is doing any tracking mechanisms to compare dismissals or persons being let go from employment compared to that of the said employer and applications for work permits? Now, just to give a little bit of a preamble to the question, so you know how best to answer it, there seems to be an attitude in the community that obviously COVID-19 is creating much problems for the business community. Okay, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, if I can ask the member to start over because I haven't gotten much of what he said.
Honorable Member, can you restart the question, but keep it as brief as you can without a long introduction to it.
Mr. Speaker, I was trying my best to give as much information so that the member can answer it, but if he asks for clarity, I'll try to clarify after. Mr. Speaker, can the Honorable Minister say if there's any tracking mechanisms between the numbers of persons being let go compared to the number of applications for work permits of the said companies? If the Premier would like me to expand as to why, then I can.
So, Mr. Speaker, I'm advised by the Director that there is in place a formal protocol between, or protocols between the Department of Work and the Department of Labor and Pensions, so that when there are layoffs, they are advised and they're in communication so that they can obviously register concern if there are instances such as those that the member alluded to.
The Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member
Mr.
for
Speaker,
Newlands.
to the honorable member, did the director say that so far this year there have been 49 total? Well, if that's the case and we have 40 active investigations, that means only 9 so far this year have been dealt with or brought to completion. Is that what that is saying?
Mr. Speaker,
Honorable Premier.
I misspoke. The number is not 49 for the year or 108 for the year as the comparison is 49 per month. Per month. 49 per month. And the 108 was 108 per month, the comparison, per month. Per month.
The Honorable the Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, that conjures up a different position now. How fast are we resolving these? If you only currently have 40, and so that's 600 a year. 600 a year. And by this, if we only have 40, has the other 500 been resolved then?
Honorable Premier.
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable Leader of the Opposition.
That is for unfair dismissal. We have 500 that has been resolved for the year.
Mr. Speaker, it's arithmetic.
Honorable Premier.
It's arithmetic. Yeah. I'm trying to find what I did with the question. Oh, there it is. Mr. Speaker, as I said, it's arithmetic that you have to do. I'll go over the answer again. As at 30th of September, which was last month, there were 40 active investigations with the department. Separate from those 40 active cases, the investigative process was completed for 7 other cases, which are now being referred to the Labor Tribunal for resolution. On average, the number of cases of individual disputes of labor and pensions rights investigated, mediated, conciliated by the department have been 49 per month for this year, compared to 108 for the per month for the previous year, and thus the number of complaints in this year, we think, largely as a result of the lockdown and what has happened with businesses, is about half the number that we had last year. And the cases I referred to, the 40, are the outstanding cases. Therefore, it stands to reason that the others have been resolved.
The Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the arithmetic is quite obvious. So this year we probably resolved 400 and something. Last year we resolved 1,200. 1,200 complaints. And that's employees complaining about unfair dismissal. How long it takes to resolve these matters on average?
Mr. Speaker, the department seeks to have these matters resolved within 90 days. If they aren't, then the matters get referred to the tribunal.
Does that mean you're doing 4 or 5 a day? And you're saying that 90 days? That's arithmetic.
Can we move to the next?
Mr. Speaker, that arithmetic don't work out too well, I dare say. If it takes 90 days to resolve them, you got 1,200, 13.
Within 90 days.
Within 90 days, yeah, you got 1,200.
You might resolve one the first day.
Yeah, you might resolve one, but that means on average you're resolving 4 or 5 a day.
The arithmetic is good, but sometimes you need a computer now, sounds like. The next question.
The elected member for Newlands to ask the Honourable Premier. Question number 11.
The Deputy Leader of the Opposition, the member for Newlands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to ask question number 11 to the Honorable Minister for Employment, Border Control, Community Affairs, International Trade, Investment, Aviation, and Maritime Affairs. Minister for everything. Can the Honorable Minister state why there continues to be lengthy delays in the clearing and processing of imported items through Customs and Border Control after their arrival in the Cayman Islands, particularly those items shipped via a courier service?
The Honourable Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, since our borders were closed in March, Caymanians and residents who would normally travel to shop are now shopping online. I can bear personal witness to this because that's what my wife is doing. The additional demand for import services, therefore, has directly impacted the operations of both CBC and courier companies, as well as the customer experience. In an effort to create efficiencies within CBC, the Director has redeployed officers and support staff to help manage the increased demand for services related to processing, inspecting, and clearing goods. Additionally, CBC is continuing to advance its online e-services platform in the interest of facilitating an efficient, transparent, and positive customer and stakeholder experience. The most recent improvements to the system include functionality to notify the importer when the declaration has been processed and when payment is due from them or their agent. The purpose of this is to improve communication lines that keep the importer updated on the status of their shipments. CBC will continue collaborating with all stakeholders, including courier companies, to process, inspect, and release imports expeditiously without compromising border control and revenue collection responsibilities. To this end, Mr. Speaker, it is important to recognize that there are indeed security and public safety risks at play, as evident by the successes of CBC to intercept drugs, firearms, and other contraband in some imports, including imports arriving via courier companies. Mr. Speaker, as part of CBC's strategic transition from the traditional gatekeepers approach to an intelligence-led risk management approach, it remains that the physical inspection of some imports will be a key component of that strategy, as will improve business processes, technology, and customer service.
The Honorable Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the member for that answer. However, the problems I'm referring to relate or go back way beyond the beginning of COVID. Matter of fact, as far back as around about this time last year, there were complaints being made that couriers were bringing in items, especially items shipped through retailers like Amazon, who charge a lot for shipping. And those items would sit between them and CBC for weeks before being cleared and given to the customer. Is there an explanation for why that was occurring from back then?
Honorable Premier, before you answer, can you move the pertinent standing order if you pass the hour of 11 a.m.?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we have we've passed 11 o'clock, the time by which questions should have been completed according to the standing orders. So I move the suspension of standing order 23,
7 and 8.
7 and 8, in order that questions may be asked of ministers after the hour of 11 o'clock.
Question is that standing orders 23, 7, and 8 be suspended to allow questions to move past the hour of 11 a.m. All in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it. Honorable Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I've conferred with the director who is with us, and he said that he's not aware that there were substantial issues prior to the lockdown. But there certainly are issues, were issues since then, and there still are some now. There's been a 32.5% increase in imports since we went into the lockdown, which has put a strain not just on CBC, but on the courier companies as well. There's also been a significant increase in the number of new importers, and they are new to the registration and declaration process, which has impacted the timely processing of their imports. For example, there have been delays in having the required authorization of agent process completed by importers and delays in providing invoices to their agent. A large percentage of imports, approximately 40%, arrive with either no invoice or with questionable invoices. Courier companies and consolidators, customs brokers, most of them have not staffed up to meet the increased demand for services and have not re-engineered their business processes to help meet the demand. Consequently, the Customs and Border Control Service has seen an increased number of clerical errors by those companies and delays in submitting declarations to CBC for processing. Many customers are now ordering from suppliers who prior to COVID-19 did not ship internationally, and consequently those companies are unfamiliar with international shipping. This has resulted in a multitude of clerical errors by those suppliers, and those shipments then end up being selected for inspection by CBC. This issue has improved in recent weeks as these companies become more compliant with CBC requirements. And in particular, one courier company incurred a debt with CBC as a consequence of not paying the import duty. Following a number of warnings by CBC and the continued failure to pay the debt, CBC suspended the release of that company's imports. The company ultimately paid that debt, and the imports were released. As a result of a resource problem at the company, they then delayed the collection of those imports from CBC, and at one point there were 19 carts of released but uncollected shipments for that company at the CBC facility. Unfortunately, during that time, that company continued to advise their customers that CBC was holding their shipments, but did not disclose to their customers the actual reasons for the delay. CBC continues to experience issues with that company. So, Mr. Speaker, I hope that is helpful.
The Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the member for that answer because that's the one I was looking for. They say you don't ask questions in here unless you know the answer. I have, through personal experience and through constituents, a matter of fact, one just texted me. She's been waiting on a shipment since September. They continue to blame CBC. Last year.
2019?
Yeah. They continue to blame CBC. And I know that this is outside of the remit of the minister, but something has to be done because I have gone through the process myself with CBC officers and proven that these courier companies are not submitting their information on time, and they're blaming CBC, and it's unfair because CBC is sitting there waiting on them. It's a consumer protection issue, I know, but something has to be done because small businesses are losing money in sales. Their inventory can't be kept up to date, and many of them have approached me and said, look, we're going out of business because of this. Shipping now is hard, it's difficult, and make it even worse when the items arrive here, they can't get them. So that's more of a statement than a question, but I want to raise that issue because it's unfair to CBC to blame them.
Honorable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the member for that, but my advice to those customers would simply be choose another courier company.
The member for Georgetown Central.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the Honorable Minister say, has the government considered increasing the number of staff members, whether on contract for a short period as we go through this pandemic, to alleviate some of the pressures which we obviously have admitted over 30% increase? That must mean a lot of pressure on the working staff. Have they considered increasing them at least temporarily, if not permanently?
Honorable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I would encourage the member to read the answer, the copy of the answer that I delivered, because all of that is set out there.
The Honorable Member for Savannah.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just to back up what my colleague from Newlands was saying, CBC is taking the blame, but I also had experience a couple of weeks ago, and I must say I was so impressed with the courteousness. Matter of fact, one of the young ladies came and helped me, walked me across the compound, guided me, told me what I had to do. So sometimes they take licks without reason, and just keep up the good work.
Just want to thank the member.
Premier.
Just want to thank the member. Mr. Speaker, most of the time you get criticism, so we're very happy for the little praise.
The Honorable Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the CBC track or evaluate its own efficiency goals?
Honorable Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm advised that since 2016, there has been a concerted effort to move as much of the business functions, activities of CBC online so that the customer can do as much of their business as possible online. The only aspect now that you can't actually do online is pay, and they hope by the end of the year to have achieved that. Because all of these processes are now being done, most of these processes are being done online, it is possible, and they're able to compare and to track response times and performance of the department, various elements of the department's work online, and be able to make proper assessments as to whether or not the service is improving or not, and the timeliness of responses.
The member for Northside caught my eye.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I wonder if there's anything that the minister could encourage CBC to do where the customer who's caught in the situation, where the courier company is really the person to blame, where they can clear their goods on proper identification and having paid the courier company their fee, as opposed to sitting there waiting ad infinitum to get it cleared.
Honorable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, that is a difficult legal dilemma, because the customer, as far as CBC is concerned, the customer is not the ultimate recipient of the goods. The customer is the courier company who has contracted with them to import the goods.
The order is the Leader of the Opposition, then the member for Georgetown Central. Honorable Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was going to go on and ask the Minister, the Premier, if how much of that efficiency, or how bad has that efficiency goal and track been disrupted since the increase in imports, and in particular the COVID crisis that we are currently going through?
Honorable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, that's a difficult question to answer, really. There's no doubt that the COVID crisis has created a significant disruption, and it has significantly ramped up the number of imports and transactions that they have to deal with, and has caused them to have to redirect staff from the ports to the department up there to help manage the increase in imports. But how much of it is attributable, of the problems are attributable to COVID is difficult to say at this point. The department is in the course of trying to do some analysis of the situation, but the director is in a position to provide an answer that I can relate to this House at this point, to that specific question.
You have another one to that? Follow up?
Yes.
Honorable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, I understand that's a difficult question, but what I was hoping was that I could have had something as to the factors that has adversely affected it. Because there are a number of factors which I recognize that could adversely affect the efficiency goals and limits that has been set over the time, and I'm wondering how much more, because you redeployed staff, because that's easily done, because there's nobody at the airport now that you need, only occasionally now that you need people at the airport, but they can go over there. But I'm sure it is, the other factors are the ones that I'm looking for, how that has affected your efficiency goals. Not necessarily COVID, but the COVID period, but not COVID.
Honorable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, one of the significant factors that is impacting all of this, obviously, is that, as it always is and ever shall be, when there are crises and disasters and anything like that causes disruption, unscrupulous persons seek to take advantage of these things. And so they have noted a significant increase in smuggling, and which of course has diverted more resources to that particular area. And they are constantly, striving to strike the right balance between being able to how long to hold up the clearance of goods, at the same time trying to ensure that they minimize the successful attempts at smuggling.
Last supplementary, the member for Georgetown Central.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think the elected member, opposition leader, kind of alluded a little bit to this, but it's a follow-up on my first question, which was, has the government considered adding resources? I recognize the answer does say that there has been a redeployment of officers and support staff, but that was not my question. My question is, you have a set number of staff members within the CDC. Is that sufficient enough to efficiently offer and clear the goods and services that is in demand now under the current pandemic environment? Or do you need more staff?
Honorable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, the answer is yes, because the airport is operating at fairly minimal levels. The seaport is not operating at all, hardly. So we don't have cruise passengers, we don't have all of those things. So there is more than enough staff to manage these issues created by the additional import. So we don't need to go out, I think, beating the bushes for more staff. What we need is greater cooperation and more efficiency on the part of persons who are importing. That will move the process along much more swiftly.
I did say that was the last supplementary, but I'll
Actually, it's not a
give it
supplement.
to the
Actually,
last. This is the last one, honorable members.
actually, it's not a supplementary, Mr. Speaker. So I just want to publicly thank the CBC for the work that they've been doing. And the reason why I'm saying what I'm saying, Mr. Speaker, is that I've actually had to bring in stuff, and I can tell you, using Cayman Airways Cargo and CBC, I had absolutely no problem. So a lot of the cases, it is issues with the courier companies and not with the CBC.
I'm sure the congratulations and the thanks are appreciated.
The elected member for Georgetown Central to ask the Honorable Minister of Employment, Border Control, Community Affairs, International Trade, Investment, Aviation, and Maritime Affairs. Question number 12.
Question number 12, the member for Georgetown Central.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to ask the question on the order paper number 12, standing in my name. Can the Honorable Minister say whether non-profit organizations are subject to the provisions of the Labor Law Revision 2011? If not, why not?
Honorable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I point out for the edification of the member that this question is pursuant to the standing orders impermissible, but I'm going to answer it. It is impermissible because the answer can be found by simply looking at the labor law. And the standing orders say very clearly that where the answer is apparent in a public document or legislation, the question is impermissible. But I recognize the member is still new at these things, so I'm going to answer the question. But we really should not take the ministers and the staff's time to provide formal answers to questions which are apparent from just simply looking at the law. Mr. Speaker, non-profit organizations are subject to the labor law if they have not applied for and been approved as a charitable organization by the Director of Labor and Pensions. Non-profit organizations approved by the Director as charitable organizations are not subject to the provisions of the labor law. This is due to the fact that it is expressly provided in Section 3 of the law, which deals with the application of the law and exemptions to it. Section 3 provides this law does not apply to A, the public service, provided that the Personnel Regulations 2006 from time to time applying to the public service shall not prescribe or permit conditions of service which are less favorable to the employee than those required by this law. And this law does not apply to charitable organizations or churches. Pursuant to Section 2 of the Labor Law, a charitable organization means one accepted and registered as such by the Director. Therefore, a certificate of registration signed by the Director of Labor and Pensions is required before an organization can be considered charitable for the purposes of the labor law and therefore exempted from the law in accordance with Section 3.
The member for Georgetown Central.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the Honorable Minister for answering the question, even though, according to the stand notice, he didn't have to. I'm quite sure the people of Cayman would be grateful. Mr. Speaker, can the Honorable Minister say whether nonprofits were always subject to all the provisions of the labor law from the start of our labor laws and charitable or nonprofit organizations legislation.
Mr.
Honorable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, that is challenging my institutional memory. I wasn't here when the labor law was first passed, but I do believe that exemption has always been there.
The elected member for Georgetown Central, to ask Honorable Minister of Employment, Border Control, Community Affairs, International Trade, Investment, Aviation, and Maritime Affairs. Question number 13.
Question number 13, the member for Georgetown Central.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to ask question on the order paper standing in my name. Can the Honorable Minister say, A, if work can determine whether there has been an increase or decrease in employment amongst Caymanians, and B, if there has been a decrease, can work determine whether the job losses are COVID-19 related?
Honorable Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As provided under the Statistics Law 2016 revision, it is actually the Economics and Statistics Office that is the government entity authorized to collect statistics in relation to national employment and unemployment. In essence, work would leverage such statistical information to inform its strategic plans and services. We all know that with the closure of our borders and the loss of tourism, COVID-19 has caused job losses. The ESO has projected that by the end of the year, unemployment is projected to increase to 6.9% from 3.5% at the end of last year, principally because of the COVID-19 pandemic.
Member for Georgetown Central.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the minister say exactly how the Economic and Statistics Office can tell if it's COVID-19 related, directly or indirectly?
Honorable Premier. Honorable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, there's not a process in place to track whether it is COVID-19 related or not. But data collected during the period of the shelter in place indicated that 50% of Works job seeker customers who made contact with the Department for Employment Services reported COVID-19 as a factor in job loss. Highest numbers were seen among persons displaced from jobs in the tourism and construction industries, although construction has now recovered, as well as administration, retail, and public transport. Mr. Speaker, additional notable numbers, I suppose, are that 1,461 job seekers registered from November 2019 to date. 1,183 of those were Caymanian. As of now, 806 Caymanians are registered as unemployed. 619 of that number registered as unemployed between March and present versus only 157 registered as unemployed during the period. Seriously? Versus only 157 Caymanians registered as unemployed during the period November 2019 to March 2020. That is prior to the shelter-in-place provisions being implemented.
Next question then. Oh. You have you're rising for a supplementary, the member for Georgetown Central.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm just kindly asking I don't know if the volume is low or any other reason, but I'm having a difficulty, and so is my colleague, to hear the answers, and it's affecting the supplementary. So no, not trying to be rude, but I just find it difficult to hear.
No, I don't take it that you're being rude, because I have to pay close attention to hear what you are saying right now. So I don't know whether it's, to me, the sound is a little bit muffled. So maybe, mics are short, and I would ask members to do what I'm doing, and that's speak there as much as possible into the mic as you can.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Again, I thank the Minister for his answers. Does the department have any intentions of creating any systems to be able to identify closer the causes for job losses or job hirings? And just for clarity, the purpose of that is for us to better monitor and be able to create policies that will affect job growth or to react to job losses. At this particular point, we know that there are or could be persons who are using COVID-19 as a way to get rid of persons, and without us being able to monitor exactly what the causes of job losses are, and we're just looking at the total job losses altogether and assuming that all of it is related to COVID-19, there could be a large percentage of people in there who are just letting people go just because it's a good time to get rid of some Caymanians. And that's the intent of the question.
Honorable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, we've just gone through, I think, at some length in response to another question, what the Department of Labor and Pensions does and the processes involved in lodging formal complaints if persons believe that they are being unfairly dismissed. That is not the role of work. That's a role of the Department of Labor and Pensions. Mr. Speaker, I think we can say confidently that given where the economy was and where the very, very low unemployment levels prior to COVID, that the vast majority of unemployment situations now are the result of the fact that we have almost no tourism industry, certainly no real international tourism industry, quite a bit of local one. The government continues to work on ways to ensure that those persons who have been displaced in that way are able to look after themselves and indeed to try to find ways of employing them in other aspects of the local economy. Because there is still no shortage of jobs in Cayman. You look at the sheer number of work permits, there are lots of jobs here. It is a question of matching individuals and their skill sets to the jobs that are actually available.
The elected member for Georgetown Central to ask the Honorable Minister of Employment, Border Control, Community Affairs, International Trade, Investment, Aviation, and Maritime Affairs. Question number 14.
Question number 14, the member for Georgetown Central.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to ask the question standing my name on the order paper. Can the Honorable Minister say whether the Royal Cayman Islands Police Service has acquired the necessary equipment to monitor music levels to enforce the Music and Dancing Control Law 2019 revision?
The Honorable the Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I can confirm that the Royal Cayman Islands Police Service has not acquired any equipment to monitor music levels to enforce the Music and Dancing Control Law 2019 revision. But I need to also clarify that the Royal Cayman Islands Police Service does not have primacy in matters of this nature, which rests with the Department of Commerce and Investment. And the reason for that is that is the department that is responsible for trade and business licenses and liquor licensing, which includes music and control law licenses. The department is in the process of drafting regulations to manage volume and decibel controls outside of the Music and Dancing Control Law. In other words, to manage volume and decibel controls that are not compliant with the Music and Dancing Control Law 2019. These regulations will be enforced through the public health law and also the penal code. Mr. Speaker, in practice, when complaints of noise are received under the Music and Dancing Control Law, they are often attended to in the first instance by the Royal Cayman Islands Police as first responders, who then refer the matter to the chairman of the Liquor Licensing Board for appropriate action with the licensee. Where an investigation is required, the matter is investigated by the Department of Commerce and Investment or the Royal Cayman Islands Police Service, who assists the licensing board in their enforcement functions. The chairman of the board may initiate investigations based on information provided directly to the board as well. The enforcement powers under the Music and Dancing Control Law for the Director of the Department of Commerce and Investment and the Royal Cayman Islands Police Service are set out at Section 11B of the Music and Dancing Control Law 2019 revision.
The member for Georgetown Central.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm not sure if there's a missing piece of the answer that was provided to us, but on my answer, it stopped at the last sentence was those regulations will be enforced through the public health law and or the police penal code. But I saw that the Premier continued to read on. Was that other notes? Oh, I see that the Premier is anticipating my supplementaries, and that's good, but you should have put that in the answer. Mr. Speaker, can the Honorable Premier Mr. Speaker, maybe because he's in charge of the police, he can answer this then. It falls under your ministerial responsibility, as in the budget. And if you control the money, you control everything. So that being said, Mr. Speaker, I see the commissioner is here. Can he potentially, through the minister, answer how they're expected to address these claims from our homeowners and residents in the neighborhood of a complaint of high volume levels of music if they don't have the tools and they're expected to call an officer from Music and Dance to come down afterwards and then use the equipment which we don't have yet? I don't understand how that works. Maybe you can explain that, because just as a layman, I think that if there was a complaint, the people would turn down the music by the time the officer or some other staff member comes around. And this level of music is disturbing many of my constituents and many Caymanians across the islands with the loud music. And I was told in the 2017 debate on the budget that we were going to get the equipment, and we've yet to get it yet. And this is 3 years later.
I think he heard you. Honorable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I refer the member back to the substantive answer. The Royal Cayman Islands Police Service does not have primacy in matters of this nature. They rest with the Department of Commerce and Investment. I was at pains to explain how that process works in the additional information I provided. But the key is, Mr. Speaker, the department is in the process of drafting regulations to manage volume and decibel levels which fall outside or which are outside the controls of the music and dancing law. So, Mr. Speaker, until we actually have regulations which say what the maximum decibel levels are, for instance, 50 feet, 100 feet outside the property of the perpetrator, there is nothing for the police to measure, because that has been the abiding problem, is that there has to be guidelines which say what, or regulations which say what the maximum noise level permitted outside your property is. Otherwise, you can't prove any breach of. I think this would also probably fall under the town, what that law called again? What that old law? I've forgotten what it is, but this is a form of public nuisance when people make really, really loud noises, which usually through music, which disturb neighbors. It's a public nuisance. So the department is working on getting that aspect of it sorted, and then from there we'll be able to proceed to equip the police and indeed staff of the liquor licensing board with the necessary means to be able to prove scientifically, is that the right word? But by virtue of technology, that the levels when they attended the property exceeded those permitted under the regulations.
From Savannah.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I remember, just before the COVID virus, we had this big problem also at Pedro Castle. But thank goodness the Borden Town police were able to go out and periodically warn them, and eventually it slowed down. Just want to make that statement, but this question I'm going to ask may not be under the same ambit, but the tinting of vehicles, who deals with that? Because sometimes the many cars that I see out there, and I know Cayman is a hot place, but oh my goodness, I can understand with the Premier and others at certain levels for the security reason, but I don't know how the tinting machine works at the police station, or who's responsible for that.
Mr. Speaker, this is slightly outside the scope of the question, but we'll see if we can answer it.
It's just that it's a very hot topic, and so I allow the supplementary. I must say that I Premier, just to say I allowed it because it's a very hot topic. My brother has warned me he's not voting for me because I haven't done anything about the noise by his house. Good thing for me is that he don't live in my constituency.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have assurances from the minister concerned that they are pressing ahead with getting the regulations done. Mr. Speaker, with respect to the tint issue, the level of, what is the word? I'm not sure. The level of obscurity, I can't think of another word, that is permitted is set out in regulations. And they do have a meter at the Department of Vehicle and motor vehicle licensing, that they're able to test it when the cars come for inspection. But the police also are in possession of such a meter, and there have been indeed several prosecutions. Again, I can attest to this because I've had, I can't say constituents because I don't think the two of them live in my constituency, but young people complain to me about why are the police prosecuting them and persecuting them for tint? And so I spent some time trying to explain that to them. So there is a system in place, and we believe the system is working. If there are instances that are observed by anyone, I think the appropriate course would be to take the license number and have a word with your friendly neighborhood police officer, who can then make the necessary report and have the matter addressed.
Honourable Member for Georgetown Central, if your question is on the original question of sound, noise,
Correct.
then I'm allowed, not on a tint.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Minister said that he had discussions with the appropriate minister responsible for the drafting of the regulations. In that discussion, did the minister say to you when exactly these regulations are going to be finished? Because again, I remind this House, we were promised that those regulations would have been drafted up from 2017. We're now 2020, and we still don't have them. And as you can tell, it's a hot topic, and the people in our communities want this addressed now.
Mr. Speaker, I know that the member from Georgetown Central comes from the instant generation, where everything that they want done must be done immediately. And this is an important issue, Mr. Speaker, but the government, I hope that the member has been paying attention, has been grappling with a few fairly serious issues over the course of this past year, not least of which has been a response to the COVID-19 pandemic. So the drafting department under the Honorable Attorney General has done an incredible job, is doing an incredible job. And we have to prioritize the various things that we are dealing with so that we can get what we consider the most important issues the country is addressing dealt with. So I just ask the member and others for patience as we hope to get this resolved as soon as possible.
Last supplementary, member for Georgetown Central.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker, for your indulgence. I see that the Honourable Minister is attempting to assist this Honourable House and the public for the answer, so I'm glad to see he will rise and add some more content to this. But in respect to the regulation, we have to wait patiently, like the good Minister, Premier has said. But can he say whether the equipment has been purchased? Because maybe the regulation may take 3 years to write, but I know it don't take 3 years to buy the equipment.
Mr. Speaker, this becomes tiresome when I have to go and read the answer over again each time for the member who doesn't pay attention.
Honourable Premier, I think that part of the question has been answered.
I did, sir.
And I don't think you need to repeat it.
He has a copy in his hand.
Mr. Speaker, no, I do not accept what the Premier has said. He said that the police department has not purchased it. He did not say exactly where he accepts the Department of DCI have purchased it. So the answer is not in this statement. So now I'm asking him to clarify, because he's had conversations with the minister. Can he say whether that department has purchased the equipment? That's all I'm asking.
Mr. Speaker, I cannot say.
Honourable Premier, the member for Commerce has risen, and I think I offer some information Honorable Minister of Commerce.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Not to rehash anything, but maybe I can offer some advice to the House and to the public as well as answer that last question. Mr. Speaker, the Department of Commerce and Investment owns a decibel reader. However, you can also download it for free on your smartphones. It's NIOSH. Let me put my glasses on. Yeah, NIOSH. It's an app on your smartphones that you can download it. So it'll be just as easy as that in the future. Let me just say, Mr. Speaker, if I can indulge the House for a moment to say that previously, even before the legislation was passed, I am aware of where we, and first let me go back a bit further to say that the Liquor Licensing Board and Department of Commerce and Investment have been working extremely close with the RCIPS on several issues surrounding licensed premises. And so we have a very good working relationship. In the circumstances, if you remember about a year ago, there was a lot of these fish fries. We were very proactive in those where we were monitoring the social media and contacting the promoters of these fish fries to ensure that they did have a license and that they abided to the requirements. And then we would work with the police when the event actually happened. So that helped to curb some of those. I want to say to members of the House that if there is loud music and you call 911, they will establish whether or not it is a licensed premises. If it is a licensed premises, we can work with the owners or we can deal with it through the Liquor Licensing Board. If it's an unlicensed premises, then it just becomes, we can warn them from the Liquor Licensing Board that they have to be licensed, but then it becomes a noise issue or a community, as a Premier said earlier, would have to be dealt with under the Towns and Communities Law. But we do work very close with the police. We've dealt with several over the last few months, and we will continue to work with them. So that is a process. Once you call 911 and you receive the support from the RCIPS, they will evaluate whether it is a licensed premises. If it is a licensed premises, we will work with them. I am aware of several instances where even though we have not completed the regulations on the noise levels, we have come to an agreement between the surrounding neighbors and the establishment on a particular, on a noise level, and that has worked out quite often where we've been able to come to an agreement between the residents and the licensed premises. So there's two things, that there's a separation of things, whether it's a licensed or unlicensed premises, and those are dealt with separately. In both instances, we work along with the RCIPS in doing so.
Member for Georgetown Central.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And this will be my last one. I don't want to dwell on it much more, but I thank the minister for getting up and clarifying, because he just highlighted a very important point, which is this answer says it's not the main focus of the Royal Command's Police Service to deal with this, but the Department of Commerce and Investment. And the minister rightfully said that once it's not a licensed premises, it's not their responsibility. It is actually the police department. So the police department.
Sorry,
Minister of Commerce.
Mr. Speaker, I did not say that it was not our responsibility. I said we would then have to deal with it in a different way, because it would be an unlicensed premises versus a licensed premises. But we work along with the police in either instance.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. I appreciate the minister trying to assist, but under what remit would they have for non-licensed premises? For example, somebody's having a party at their home. That department has nothing to do with a private residence, so it would have to fall under the police department. Hence the reason why I know the primary enforcers or monitors of the law is the Royal Command's Police Service. So they themselves also have to have this equipment.
Just to give you some information, this matter of noise goes way back to the 80s. in 1980s when I entered this house, there was this big thing, and some of you might be too young to remember it, that they had sessions, if you remember. That was a prominent thing. License places closed down at 12:30, 1:45, and so illegal sessions were rampant all over the place and was really a bother. And one of the reasons why the liquor license hours were opened were because people were complaining, and indeed the Tourism Association were complaining of these sessions and noise level. And so those were two reasons why the liquor license law was relaxed the way it has been. And from then we were having this noise, and the police department over the years managed to manage it. Again, it has become prevalent. But and at that time, they were saying it was not the level, not the responsibility of the towns and countries, because that same, Mr. Premier, came in, that same argument came in on where was the responsibility laying, and police were saying no, it's not. It's not the town and countries law. I think it's town and country law. Community. Maybe town and community law. But it goes from then. But I thought I'd say that to the House to give you some information on why the liquor license law was also open to those later hours. And it did stop the sessions. It did stop that, then something else arose.
Mr. Speaker, I hope to conclude this discussion by saying the key is the regulations. We've got to fix a decibel level so that we know certainly what is a breach. As I said before, that decibel levels above whatever the number is should not exceed a certain level outside of the property. That's where we need to get with the regulations. Once that is done, the various mechanisms to be able to measure that in a way that the courts will actually accept are then what need to be done for this to be properly enforced, whether it's a breach by a liquor license establishment or by a private citizen.
I think we have gone through this and over this question. We should move on.
Statements by the honorable ministers and members of the cabinet.
No statements.
Personal explanations.
None.
Obituary and other ceremonial speeches.
The member for, sorry, okay. None.
Raising a matter of privileges.
None.
Other business. Motions. Private member motion number 3 of 2020-2021. Motion to review pension and employee benefits reform to be moved by the elected member for Bordentown West.
The honorable member for Bordentown West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to move private members motion number 3 of 2020-21 standing in my name, and the motion read as follows. Whereas the current COVID-19 global pandemic required quick legislative initiatives to assist the people of the Cayman Islands, and whereas the recent changes to the National Pensions Law 2012 have impacted the adequacy of pension plans to meet the retirement needs of current and future generations of employees working in the Cayman Islands, and whereas this legislative body has the constitutional responsibility to consider the impact of laws passed and enacted to ensure that they are in the best long-term interests of the Cayman Islands, be it therefore resolved that this Legislative Assembly establish a select committee to review the impact of the recent changes to the National Pension Law and to make recommendations to ensure the adequacy and viability of the pension funds registered in the Cayman Islands to meet the future retirement needs of the people of the Cayman Islands before the 20th of February 2021, and be it further resolved that this select committee also considers the feasibility of implementing disability benefits for employees in the Cayman Islands. Thank you.
Seconder, please. The Honorable, the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to second the motion.
The motion has been moved. As the member for Boddington West speaking thereto.
Mr. Speaker, if the government just want to get up and accept it, I'll just take it as the motion is read. But I will say a few words towards it. Mr. Speaker, earlier this year, this Legislative Assembly voted on the National Pensions Amendment Bill 2020 that gave businesses...
Honorable member, before you move on, let me put the motion as resolved. Be it therefore resolved that this Legislative Assembly establish a select committee to review the impact of the recent changes to the National Pensions Law and make recommendations to ensure the adequacy and viability of the pension funds registered in the Cayman Islands to meet the future retirement needs of the people of the Cayman Islands before the 28th of February 2021. And be it further resolved that the Select Committee also considers the feasibility of implementing disability benefits for employees in the Cayman Islands. Please continue, Honorable Member.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Let's start over. Just the thing there. Yeah, back my train of thought. Mr. Speaker, earlier this year, this Legislative Assembly voted on the National Pensions Amendment Bill 2020 that gave businesses an opportunity to participate in a pension holiday, as well as to allow some employees in the private sector to make a one-time withdrawal of up to $10,000, as well as 25% of the remaining balance. Mr. Speaker, while this amount was different from what we in official opposition proposed, I want to state that I was fully supportive of this initiative, as I believe that the people and the business owners needed some financial relief at that time. You may recall, Mr. Speaker, that at the time there was a lot of uncertainty in Cayman and around the world, and we in this Honorable House did the right thing by trying to reduce the amount of uncertainty. I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, that based on feedback received from many within our community, that we did the right thing at that time. Mr. Speaker, I must say that my decision to support the pension holiday and to allow people to access their pension funds was not taken lightly. I have always been concerned with decisions taken today and how it will affect the Cayman Islands of tomorrow. As legislators and political leaders, we must be mindful of mortgaging the future for the temporary convenience of the present. But, Mr. Speaker, the global health crisis that was facing us then and continues today is neither temporary nor is it convenient. And while we in this Honorable House exercise our constitutional responsibility as required by Section 59(2) of our Constitution to make laws to the peace, order, and good government of the Cayman Islands, we still have a responsibility to ensure that the impact of legislations that are passed are in the best interest over the long run. The truth is, Mr. Speaker, that even prior to the amendment to the National Pension Law, our pension system had challenges. Despite there being no retirement age in the private sector, we have people being forced out of the workplace at 65, and in some cases, at 60 years of age. I have long argued, both inside and outside this chamber, that a contribution rate of 10% is inadequate. Think about this, Mr. Speaker. Based on a contribution rate of 10%, it would take 10 years to save 1 year's salary. If a person works for 50 years, they would have saved 5 years' salary. This would result in a serious shortfall when considering the life expectancy for men is almost 80 years of age, and for women it is almost 85 years of age. Simply put, Mr. Speaker, if someone retires at 65 and living to 85, they would need income for 20 years, but they're only saving 5 years' worth of salary. And if just by some miraculous investment and everything else, even if that 5 years' worth of salary were to double to 10 years, there will still be a shortfall. So that is one of the challenges that we have, Mr. Speaker. But the point that I'm making is that even for those changes we made to the law, we still had those challenges. And we need to accept that the changes that we have made added to those challenges, and now we are duty bound to fix it. I'm sure we in this Honorable House would agree that we have a responsibility to ensure that our people should be able to retire with dignity and a decent quality of life. Mr. Speaker, one of the reasons I asked for a select committee is to give the government the opportunity to provide greater details on the input and assumptions used to arrive at their decision. As you are aware, Mr. Speaker, the deliberations and documents of Cabinet are confidential and are exempt from release to the public. I think it would be useful if some of the information becomes available to help the committee, if approved, in meeting its objective of finding the best way forward for pensions in these islands. Mr. Speaker, the government released the numbers of the amount that was withdrawn for the period May to July 2020. That was in excess of $400 million. That is a large amount of money, and in most cases would represent an average of 25% of a person's pension savings, or roughly 10 years' worth of salary that they would have when they go to retire. Simply put, Mr. Speaker, the shortfall in the amount of income needed after a person retires just got bigger, and in some cases, some people may not retire at all. Now, the second part of the motion, Mr. Speaker, deals with, in terms of the committee, looking at the feasibility of implementing disability benefits for employees in the Cayman Islands. And I thought long and hard before I added that section. But one of the things that jumped out when this COVID crisis started and we start looking at options available to us to benefit the people and what it is that we could have done, we realized that we do have a lack of a safety net in Cayman. And for whatever reason, whether we want to slice it or dice it, as we become more advanced and the country moves to having more people and everything else, we need to start looking at creating up a safety net for people. I mean, right now as it stands, there's still a lot of pressures being put on the business community, and a lot of pressures, even more pressures even being put on government. And I think at the end of the day, the whole idea for us here is to make sure that we create a system to give our people some level of protection. And the fact that the first thing that we could have drawn for was their retirement as soon as an emergency, for them to access their retirement funds. It goes to show that there is also a lack of that safety net. And I'm hoping that as we're looking at the best way forward for pensions, that we also look at the ability of maybe creating a safety net that we have in some countries where at a minimum people can put aside, or at least the government can put aside based on what people have done, something while you're working, so at least if there is a shock to the system, we have some level of protection. Mr. Speaker, I'm aware that this Legislative Assembly will be dissolved in the next 5 months, and as such, we may not have enough time to finish what we started, but we have a responsibility to the people of these islands to keep working on their behalf. Mr. Speaker, I believe it is necessary to start the process as it will allow the next Parliament to finish what we started and have the benefit of the information, knowledge, and experiences that we have gained during this crisis. So, Mr. Speaker, while the committee, with 5 months left to go, may not finish what we started, all I'm asking for this House is let us begin. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Does any other member wish to speak? The Honorable the Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I have learned in my life that among the most important factors that must be considered in making any decision is that of timing. Mr. Speaker, these Cayman Islands have very few natural resources aside from our people. Some would say, Mr. Speaker, that we are in fact the Singapore of the region, making much out of little in terms of the resources that we are blessed with. There are hundreds of islands around the world that are able to boast sea, sun, and sand. And so while we are very proud and often claim to have the best in terms of sea and sand, it is not anymore really that unique an attraction for visitors. It is the drive, creativeness, and business prowess of our forefathers and foremothers that form the foundation on which these modern Cayman Islands are built. And it is from the investment of their sweat equity that we are able to have a solid place in this world and are able to compete so admirably. Mr. Speaker, it is with this backdrop in mind that I reflect on the current position of these islands, and more specifically, the position of the businesses and people of these islands, for which I, and I am certain all members of this Honorable House, care deeply. Mr. Speaker, in principle, the government is supportive of a rate of pension contributions that will help to ensure that when our people reach retirement age, they will have a pension waiting for them that will permit them to be able to live comfortably and in dignity. My view about the current pension arrangement is no secret. From the moment it was seriously considered that we should create a pension scheme for the private sector and then allow private sector companies to run it, I knew, even all those years ago, that we were heading for trouble. And then you couple that with the fact that the pension contributions which are made are not enough to actually create the basis for a good pension in your old age. You will know that we have a recipe for something that doesn't work very well. On the current arrangement, $12,000 a year is the maximum anyone can draw from their mandatory contribution or the pension based on their mandatory contributions. So, Mr. Speaker, nothing I say is any attempt to defend the current system. We do need a revamped pensions system. But now is not the time to do that. Mr. Speaker, We are in the final stages, the government is in the final stages of appointing a new National Pensions Board that will be tasked with recommending future policy changes in respect of national pensions. And so the member from Bordentown West concerns about getting on with the work. I understand them, but I should tell him that the government is ahead of him in dealing with that particular matter. Mr. Speaker, as that member so eloquently argued during his debate on the Legislative Assembly Management Bill, and again during his debate on the Defense Bill last evening, when he shared that although the Cayman Islands as a whole is performing admirably in these economically challenging times, he urged the government and this House to be mindful of the effects of policy decisions on our finances. And while the government finances are relatively stable, despite COVID-19 raging all around us, the same cannot be said about the financial resilience of the range of businesses and individual employers in these islands. Mr. Speaker, according to the data I received last evening, the Cayman Islands has over 11,000 active trade and business licenses. Of those, the Department of Commerce and Investment has licensed 627 small businesses. And for the benefit of those listening, DCI defines small businesses as those businesses that employ up to 12 employees, excluding the owner, and have an annual gross revenue not exceeding $750,000 in the preceding fiscal year. Additionally, DCI has licensed a whopping 5,346 micro-businesses. Micro-businesses are defined as those businesses that employ up to 4 employees, excluding the owner, and have a gross revenue not exceeding $250,000 in the preceding fiscal year. Mr. Speaker, the Department of Commerce and Investment and the Cayman Islands Center for Business Development, both under the able leadership of Minister Hugh, are working hard to deliver incentives and programs that are helping businesses keep afloat and helping equip them with the tools necessary to be successful despite the challenges posed by the pandemic and the subsequent closure of our borders to most tourism. During this meeting, Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Finance received the support of this House for a government motion to proceed with a $200 million loan guarantee program to help medium and large-sized businesses with their operating expenditures and debt financing needs. Mr. Speaker, it is the reality of these financial challenges, particularly on our micro, small, and medium-sized businesses, that makes it impossible for the government to accept this motion at this time. Mr. Speaker, many of the employees I speak to are struggling to use their allotment of leave this year, due in part to them not desiring to leave our relatively safe shores to go to a jurisdiction with a higher risk of COVID-19 infections. Mr. Speaker, we need financially strong businesses to confidently hire workers, ideally Caymanian workers. Raising the cost of doing business at this time would act as a significant fiscal policy change that directly and adversely impacts the cost of labor for businesses of all sizes. Our assessment, Mr. Speaker, is that increasing the cost of doing business, as this motion would suggest the government is doing at this time, would lead businesses to seek other ways to reduce costs, such as delaying hiring of Caymanians and laying off Caymanians. Mr. Speaker, the government does not think that that is the kind of message that this government or indeed this legislative assembly should be sending to businesses at this time, that we are contemplating significantly increasing their cost of doing business. It is going to have an incredibly chilling effect on the hiring of Caymanians. The members of the opposition are constantly banging on, Mr. Speaker, about the need, we heard it this morning again, to ensure that Caymanians are kept in employment and Caymanians are employed to fill jobs. But they need, Mr. Speaker, to be consistent in their messaging. They cannot, on the one hand, constantly bang on about that particular issue with which the government agrees, and then urge this House and the government to proceed with actions which we know, we're not guessing, will have the opposite effect. If you tell business people in the current environment that they are going to have to significantly increase their contribution that they make to people's pensions, what do you think they are going to say? How do you think they are going to react? This government has taken the opposite approach. We have granted a holiday on the payment of pension premiums to ease up both employers and employees, to ensure that employees still have or have more cash in their pockets because they don't have to make that mandatory pension premium contribution. Similarly, Mr. Speaker, with employers, Mr. Speaker, I keep making this point over and over again to the opposition, but they don't seem to understand and to appreciate this. That if businesses go out of operation, there will be no jobs for anyone, neither work permit holders or Caymanians. We have to keep businesses operating. We have to support businesses so they can employ Caymanians, so Caymanians can have the means to look after their families and send their children to school. That's basic economics, Mr. Speaker. Not coming down to the House at a time like this and asking us to agree to a motion, the effect of which, if we proceeded with it, would be to put more pressure on businesses, more pressure on employees who will, if the motion were to be agreed to, would have the ultimate effect of having to pay greater amounts of money into their pension plans. Mr. Speaker, I said at the start, timing is everything. Now, when there is a global crisis, when our borders are closed, principally closed to almost all forms of travel except repatriation, when there is less money in circulation, when businesses are struggling to stay open, when employees are worried about whether they're going to keep their jobs, the message from their elected representatives should not be, Mr. Speaker, we are going to put more pressure on you because we're not worried so much about your surviving now. We want to make sure you have a pension when you retire in 20 years or 30 years. If you don't live through this time, you're not going to be 60 years old. If your business falls now, there will be no business for you to rely on as revenue for yourself, income for yourself and your family, but even more importantly, to keep Caymanians employed. And so, Mr. Speaker, while I want to thank the member from Bontown West for bringing the motion, Mr. Speaker, now is not the time to have brought it. He ought to have brought it when the economy was doing well, if he wanted to have this particular discussion. But, Mr. Speaker, I'm not sure what sort of economic principles guide the policy decisions the opposition are making as they plan to present themselves as the alternative to this government in the next election. But, Mr. Speaker, I hope, Mr. Speaker, that this is not indicative of their thought process, because putting additional pressure on businesses and employees at this time to take more money out of their bank accounts and out of their pockets to contribute to pensions is not an approach which I would deem as either sensible or prudent. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable members, the House will suspend until 2:15. 2:15.